Okay, welcome everyone to this Zoom meeting regarding local opportunities in the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. My name is Carolyn Omperon, and I'm the chair of the local Mid-Missouri Sierra Club group. And I wanted to thank all of you for joining us today and your interest in this topic. And also wanted to mention the other co-host of this session, Renew Missouri, Mid-Missouri Peace Works, League of Women Voters, Boone County and Columbia. That's it. That's four. I got them. So that's all of us. And so we want to thank you for participating. And we hope that you'll find this session really useful. There's a wealth of material about all these programs that the federal government is announcing. And our two speakers today have, poured through that information to help us get down to the ones that are most likely going to be local opportunities for us. Okay, still letting in people. So I do want to ask anybody that's just joined, if you'll put your audio on mute until you're ready to make a comment or ask a question. Also, if you'll enter into the chat window your name, your job role or organization, and your pronouns, if you're willing. And then I also wanted to mention that we will take questions throughout because each program is unique, and so it might be more appropriate to take questions at that time. So if you wanted to ask a question, you can either put it in the chat or under reactions at the bottom of your screen. There is a thing where you can raise your hand and then subsequently lower your hand, and I'll try and watch for those and call on you to ask your questions. Okay, so with that, let me go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Well, actually, I'll introduce both speakers and then we can just keep rolling as we go. So our two speakers today are Tony Mendoza. He is with the National Sierra Club. He's a senior attorney in Sierra Club's environmental law program, and he focuses on the electric sector. And then our second speaker will be Emily Piontek. She is managing director and policy coordinator with Renew Missouri and is located right here in Columbia. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tony, and he will share his screen.
Hey, everybody. As Carolyn said, I'm Tony Mendoza. I'm a staff attorney with Sierra Club, and I focus on electric sector issues in Missouri and other nearby states like Indiana and Arkansas. Here's my presentation, Inflation Reduction Act Opportunities for Mid-Missouri. And we're going to cover 6 program areas: clean energy tax credits, a DOE loan program, the greenhouse gas reduction fund, and the part of that that's called Solar for All, the climate pollution reduction grants programs, one of the environmental justice programs, and then the home energy rebates. And we'll just dive right in. And as Carolyn said, if anyone has questions as we go, I'd be happy to have them, of course. Clean energy credits. Okay, so when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed last August 2022, the expansion and extension of the clean energy credits was probably one of the most covered items in the press. This is the big deal for the investor-owned utilities like Ameren and Evergy and all the others around the country. It extends the credits through 2030 at a minimum. One thing I want to mention to all of you is that historically, support for clean energy has been provided by tax credits, which are only useful if you're a for-profit entity. But in the Inflation Reduction Act, as folks have probably heard by now, there's this new provision called the direct pay, or I think the White House is calling it elective pay, which essentially means that nonprofit entities can get the benefit of the tax credit through just a cash payment from the Treasury, U.S. Treasury. And so if you're a local government or any other nonprofit entity, including a nonprofit utility, but I'll mention schools and churches, other houses of worship, if you want to build, say, solar, you can put it into service, you file this tax form that's set up for this purpose, and you get a payment from the government that's of the same amount you would have gotten as a tax credit if you were, Ameren, Missouri, say. There's also these important adders to the tax credit, we call them. One of them is for energy community. Another one is for domestic content. And so if you meet the requirements for either of those, you increase your PTC, your production tax credit, or your investment tax credit. And I should have mentioned that a good thing about the Inflation Reduction Act is for any wind or solar project or any other clean project, you can choose the investment tax credit or the production tax credit. And that basically means if you do production tax credit, you get paid a certain amount of cents per kilowatt of clean energy you produce, kilowatt hour of clean energy you produce. And the investment tax credit means you get a percentage of your capital expenditure paid by the government. And so you can increase those by taking advantage of these adders. And as I mentioned earlier, the timeline is either 2032 or when the US electric sector hits a certain GHG greenhouse gas reduction target, whichever is later. So I always say 2032 at the earliest. It could end up being later if we don't make as much progress as a lot of us hope. So that's the basic picture of tax credits. Here's one adder that I wanted to mention very briefly, especially for folks who are involved in Solar for All program in Missouri. This is one of the very few credits under this. I should say what it's called, shouldn't I? The low income community bonus credit for small wind and solar. And there's a lot of text on this slide, and I won't read all of it to you. But the gist of this is one of the few tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act that you have to apply for to be able to receive an allocation and then take advantage of. All the other tax credits, you just build your project. If you meet the requirements, you file your tax return or your direct pay tax statement, and you get the money. Here, you have to apply to the U.S. Treasury. At the bottom here, at the deadline, the first deadline is November 18th, and so that's coming up fast. Entities that intend to build community solar or solar for low-income folks should strongly consider applying for this adder. It increases the credit that every solar project would be worth, and therefore an entity that had a Solar for All grant, which by the way, we'll talk about Solar for All later in the program. This program can extend the reach of your grant dollars to put solar on more homes, to make solar more affordable for low-income folks. And I would note there's aspects of this program for Indian tribes, and there's also aspects or there's allocations of these credits for Indian tribes and also for public housing. And the eligible entity is the owner of the facility, which could include a local government entity. Happy to talk about that one more if folks have questions. Okay, so this is like one of the adders that's gotten more attention. It's called the energy community. And the idea here was just that Congress wanted to direct extra clean energy funding to areas that have historically been burdened by pollution. Historically been burdened by pollution and dependent on fossil fuel jobs that will now be going away. So there's three categories. There's a lot of text here, but you don't have to remember it because there's a map that shows you where these are, except for brownfields. And so there are obviously a lot of brownfields in Missouri. I personally have not been able to find a good map, but if you install solar, and I'm always going to use solar as the example because it's the one that's most likely in most scenarios, but any clean energy. But if you install solar on brownfield, your base 30% tax credit, investment tax credit becomes 40%. And so if it cost $100 million to build the project, you would get 40 million as a tax credit if you build it on a brownfield. And then there's these two others that are coal. One of them is coal related, coal mine closures, coal power plant closures. And this other one is fossil fuel employment related, but you don't have to remember those because you can just go to this DOE map and see where they are. And here's the map for the US, and you can see most of the energy communities are in places like Appalachia and the Wyoming Powder River Basin coal fields where you would expect them, but they're all over the country. And then let's zoom into Missouri. So here's a screenshot of the Missouri energy communities. And there's a little one in Columbia right here. I don't know if you guys can see my scroll thing, but there's a much larger one just east of Jefferson City. And then there's some along the Mississippi River, and then a bunch in the Kansas City area and along the border with Kansas. Any clean energy project that is built in these areas will get 10% extra credit. And so I would expect utilities to seek to build solar, wind, battery projects there. Other entities, such as local governments or universities, schools, should consider taking advantage of this opportunity as well. Okay, so here's a graphic that just shows how an entity could stack the clean energy credits to get more of the project covered by the federal government. And in this example, I'm using the investment tax credit, but recall that any project could go under the production tax credit option, and the same concept applies, where you can add to increase the value of the production tax credit. I think if you're doing a really big solar project, it would be wise to hire a consultant to think about whether the investment tax credit path is better or the production tax credit path is better. For most small projects, I assume the investment tax credit would probably be the path. But anyways, so the base credit, again, for the investment tax credit is 30% if you meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. Then let's say you get the energy community bonus because you built your solar project in one of those areas on the map that we were just looking at, or it's on a brownfield. Let's say you use domestic content for your solar panels. And there are rules from the Treasury about how both of these adders, the Treasury Department, about how both these adders apply. And then let's say you applied for the low income bonus credit and you got an allocation. So in this scenario, your $100 million solar project you would now get a check from the federal government for $70 million. And so you would only have to finance the remaining 30%. Okay, let's keep going since we have a lot of content, Emily and I. So this is the U.S. Department of Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Loan Program, which is a mouthful to say. This is a new loan program that was made possible by the Inflation Reduction Act. The funding mechanism is low interest loans. The idea here is to repurpose existing fossil fuel infrastructure to new clean energy purposes. And you can include the cost of environmental remediation. Eligible entities are any owner of fossil fuel or other energy infrastructure. And the deadline for dispersing these funds is September 2026. So there is a little bit of time, and DOE is offering free pre-application consultations. And so like what types of projects could they have in mind? This comes like right from the DOE guidance. So in energy infrastructure repurposing for decarbonization. One example I've heard of that is, let's say you own a large collection of gas stations and you want to repurpose them to electric vehicle stations with some food and drinks and things like that. You could get a loan and do it. Another one that is talked about, another option is retired or retiring power plants or gas boilers in a university or in a municipal building. You can repower or repurpose that facility with renewable energy, distributed energy, these other options to replace the existing fossil fuel infrastructure to new clean energy infrastructure and get this good low interest government loan to back it up. And here's one more slide on this. This is an op-ed from Utility Dive, which is a trade publication by Jigar Shah, who's the head of this loan office. And this is one example project he gave in that op-ed, which is you own a 300 megawatt coal plant. It's ceased operations, or it's going to cease operations in the near term, I would add. You replace it with solar and a battery. You also clean up the coal ash on the site, and you get a low interest loan to help finance this. And I would note that this program also pairs with the tax credits. And so in this example, the entity that was building the solar and battery would also get the tax credit payments. And so if they did this in an energy community, those would be increased. In any case, one consistent theme here is you can stack many of these programs with other programs to decrease the cost of doing clean energy projects. I guess I sort of mentioned this, but for universities that maybe have boilers to natural gas boilers that provide steam for their on-campus facilities, you could repurpose that type of infrastructure to geothermal-based infrastructure and get a loan from DOE. Happy to talk about this one more if folks have questions. I'm going to keep trucking. Okay, so the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. I'll go fast through this. This was when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, this was thought of as the Climate Bank Fund, which it is. But this diagram shows that there's actually two different paths. So the $20 billion goes to these nonprofit financing entities, which are and will be climate green banks. But then $7 billion goes for Solar for All. And 40% of all this money has to go to low-income and disadvantaged communities. The goal of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is to finance clean energy projects to benefit low-income communities, low-income folks. The idea is that, middle-income and wealthy folks are able to put solar on their roofs, for example, because they can get, bank loans and things like that. But low-income folks don't have as good access to that financing, and this is meant to plug this gap. Okay, so EPA is in charge of this program, US EPA, and they have set up 3 competitions. One, the biggest competition is $14 billion, is going to go to 2 to 3 national green banks. And those national green banks, when they are set up next year, will be able to fund projects in Missouri, just like every other state. And then there's a $6 billion, the second bullet is the $6 billion competition for regional hub nonprofits, which are meant to then seed other either green banks or other financing entities. And these entities will be able to provide funding to nonprofits in Missouri. And then there's the third competition, which I think folks have heard of by now, is the Solar for All competition, which operates a little bit differently. And so applications for all 3 programs were due in October. EPA is going to make award announcements in spring of next year, and then the actual funding will be dispersed to the winning entities in summer of next year, and then we will go into implementation of all 3 programs. So for the green bank aspect of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, EPA and its guidance has told the banks they need to spend their financing in 3 main areas, and that's zero emissions distributed generation, rooftop solar being the most likely, but not the only. Building decarbonization, basically electrifying buildings and installing heat pumps, doing other things to reduce fossil fuel use in buildings, and then zero emissions transport, electric vehicles, buses, transit, things like that. So the National Green Bank is going to fund projects in this area, including in Missouri. And then I wanted to mention the role of CDFIs briefly. So community development financial institutions were set up a few decades ago to fund affordable housing projects around the country. And there are about 25 CDFIs in Missouri, mostly based in the St. Louis and Kansas City areas, but not exclusively. And if you go to the websites of those CDFIs, they're pretty exclusively focused on affordable housing projects and, I should mention, economic development projects. They have not yet started to advertise the greenhouse gas reduction funding opportunity. But for those of you who have contacts with CDFIs, I think it'd be a good thing to, get them to start advertising this opportunity in their community that, hey, we're about to have opportunity to take in all this funding from the national green banks that we can then redeploy deploy in Missouri. So CDFIs have an important role. Okay, Solar for All.
Tony, Tony, before you go on, there's one
Yes.
question. It's from Eric Hempel for the City of Columbia. And he says, thank you for the presentation, Tony. Based on your example, I understand the EIR can be used for energy projects that are not owned by utilities. A district energy project, for example, ?
Correct. Any owner of this is one of the most broadly potentially applicable programs under the IRA. So any potential owner or any owner of fossil fuel infrastructure, a gas station, a power line, or not just fossil fuel infrastructure, but energy infrastructure. So if you own a power line, you own a gas station, you own a gas boiler in your municipal building or in a university building, you own a fleet of gas burning vehicles because you're a state government or a local government, any entity like that is potentially applicable. Now, these are going to be competitively issued loans. They're not going to issue, this program is not going to do a loan to me because I have, a gas burning furnace in my house. But if you could come forward with a project at scale that shows some greenhouse gas reductions, it's unlimited to any type of, it's not limited to utilities, just directly answer the question. And the best source, if you want to learn more about this, you could just email me and we could talk about it, or read this loan office put out guidance on how this loan program is supposed to work in May 2023. And that guidance is the best source of information. And you can I would encourage folks to take DOE up on these free pre-application consultations that they advertise on their website. Happy to talk about that more, but want to keep trucking. Where were we? Solar for All. Okay, so Solar for All is the part of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that isn't really a climate bank. It's a grant program. I should say what the purpose of it is. The idea is to expand community solar programs for low income and disadvantaged folks. An entity, a part of the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, and this entity has a mouthful of a name, the Environmental Improvement and Energy Resources Authority, which y'all I'm sure know better than I do, submitted a notice of intent and actually submitted an application. I personally thought their application looked quite strong, and I would be surprised if they don't win. The city of Joplin, Missouri also put in a notice of intent. I don't know if they followed through and did an application, but what should happen is the city of Joplin should talk to the Resources Authority and they should coordinate, would be my guess. In any case, the specific uses of this money is going to be rooftop solar, community solar, battery storage, efficiency upgrades, and importantly, solar workforce development in low income and disadvantaged communities. And if you want to know which communities are covered, you go to this tool, the Climate Environmental Justice Screening Tool. And if you click on that map, you can see which areas in your communities, which census tracts in your communities qualify for this spending. And there are some all over the state of Missouri. And there's also 3 other means of defining that term. For example, there are low-income folks who don't live in a low-income community. I think they're referred to as geographically dispersed low-income folks. And those folks are identified by income. In any case, this is a pretty exciting program. I was very happy to see the state of Missouri applied. When the award is made next summer in 2024, implementation will begin and occur through 2024 through 2029. And I think this Resources Authority is intending to install rooftop solar on a few tens of thousands of homes, which is cool. And a Sierra Club key recommendation I wanted to mention is we think it makes a lot of sense to do whole home retrofits for low income households. And so combine your Solar for All funding with the home rebates funding we're going to talk about later, because having a big construction project at your house is annoying, and doing it once to kind of get all of the things that are available not only delivers the most economic benefit to low income families, delivers the biggest environmental benefit, and it just makes a lot of sense to do it all at once. And I'll mention that again when I get to the home rebate section. Okay, climate pollution reduction grants. This is another one that you probably have heard of because Missouri is pretty far into the implementation of this. The purpose of this part of the IRA is to give money to state, local, and tribal governments to come up with climate pollution reduction plans and then to implement aspects of them. 3 entities in Missouri received a planning grant, and so that's DNR for the state, the East-West Gateway Council for St. Louis Metro, and the Mid-America Regional Council for the Kansas City Metro. All 3 of these entities have to file a priority climate action plan with US EPA by March 1, 2024. And I have the EPA website for this program here and the DNR website. DNR is accepting comments on this plan right now, including they have a poll on their website. One other thing I would mention is if you're a local government that's outside the St. Louis metro area and the Kansas City metro area, it makes sense to coordinate with DNR to include some of your local government's climate planning goals and measures projects in the statewide plan. Because next year, EPA is having a competition for the implementation part of the CPRG program. And to be able to seek funding to implement a program or a measure, like let's just a hypothetical measure. Let's say you're a community that wanted to update your building code to have a more efficient building code. Let's say you're the city of Columbia, Missouri, and you're not in Kansas City or St. Louis metro areas. You would call DNR or however else, meet with DNR. You say, hey, we want to potentially seek funding for this from EPA. So we want you to include an item in your statewide plan about our building code refresh project. And so then when DNR files their priority climate action plan on March 1st of next year, that will set up Columbia to then submit an application to EPA on April 1st of next year for an implementation grant. I hope that made sense. That came across as a little convoluted as I was presenting it, but hopefully that made sense. The point is to seek implementation grant funding, the project or measure has to be in a priority climate action plan that was drafted with the EPA funding. And so it has to be in one of those three plans that we saw in the previous slide. Implementation grants are going to be judged by EPA based on the most GHG reductions, which projects measures have the most GHG reductions, including early ones, and which projects are transformative in the sense that they could be copied by other jurisdictions, and which projects benefit low-income communities. I'm happy to answer more questions about this program if folks have those. Oh, and so Sierra Club has suggested measures for cities. We have state measures too, but I think Carolyn's going to send this slide around, and then if you wanted to, you could click on transportation, which is a hyperlink, will then take you to the Sierra Club suggested measures for transportation and so on for buildings and clean electricity. I just listed here on this bullet some of what I think are the key ones. One is whole home retrofits, especially for low income folks. And then EV charging, all electric vehicle fleets for municipalities or for state governments, building solar and wind to serve your city's local needs, and then job training for electrification and solar installation, to the extent that those are bottlenecks in your community, which they are in many. And I will keep trucking. So, okay, environmental justice community change grants program. This is, let's see, $2 billion that EPA is going to announce this competition, I think either this week or next. The eligible recipient of this funding is a community-based nonprofit in coalition with another community-based nonprofit or with a local government or institution of higher education or a tribe. So the key entity here is the community-based nonprofit, which I think in EPA's guidance, they refer to that loosely as an environmental justice group, but the statute says community-based nonprofit. My read is like any community-based nonprofit that has a kind of an environmental or climate mission or purpose would probably qualify, including, for example, potentially a Black church or, a church, African-American church that had that type of mission could qualify, I think. And the types of projects that are fundable under these change grants are broad. Everything else in the Inflation Reduction Act pretty much is focused on air pollution and climate. The EJ, the statute refers to them as the environmental justice block grants. EPA has branded them as the community change grants, which is why I have both names here for some reason. You can fund air monitoring in your community, investments in projects that reduce pollution, like, for example, putting in electric stoves in affordable housing, resilience measures related to high heat or cold, reducing indoor or outdoor toxic exposure, for example, lead paint, lead pipes. And then this last bullet is facilitating engagement in public processes. So if a community was facing, I don't know, a big refinery project that was being built, the community group could apply for a community change grant and hire experts to help, understand the air permitting process for that refinery. And so the EJ block grants are a great opportunity for your local nonprofits to, deliver real environmental progress to the community. Timeline, the EPA keeps saying they're going to publish this notice in early fall 2023, which means it has to be pretty soon. And then there'll be a rolling 1-year application window with the first awards. EPA was saying first awards this year. I suspect that's not. I think it's more likely Q1 of 2024. Okay, last program, then I'm going to kick it to Emily. So the home energy rebates. This is the one part of the IRA that the state government has to say yes, or the state is entirely left behind. All the other programs we've talked about, there are multiple different entities that can take advantage of the program if, for example, the state of Missouri didn't want to or didn't want to lead on it. But this is one where if the state says no, all the people in Missouri will be left behind. And so they're the home energy rebates. There are two programs I want to talk about. One is called the Home Efficiency Rebate Program, or HOMES. The These are performance-based energy savings retrofit rebates, and up to $8,000. They're not limited to low-income folks, but low or middle-income folks get a higher percentage of their costs refunded. And the types of projects you can do are things like more efficient air conditioners, insulation, air sealing, windows, doors, smart thermostats. One thing I wanted to mention is this one, you can't double dip with this program and the next slide I'm going to mention. You have to do one or the other. This one makes sense if you're not low income or middle income, because it's the only one that's available to you. But the idea here is to reduce energy use in houses, and the federal government will reimburse you for all of the costs or most of them, depending on your income. And the eligible recipients are homeowners or aggregators. Okay, and then the other one is called the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebate Program, which is a mouthful. These are point of sale rebates, and they only apply for low income and middle income households. And you can pay for things like an electric heat pump with heating and cooling, an electric stove, or also similar things to the previous program, like insulation, air sealing, panel upgrades, wiring. This program allows up to $14,000 in spending. And as I said earlier, it's limited to low and middle income households. The timeline for this one is the state has to tell EPA whether they're going to accept or not this money by August 16th of 2024. And so there's still time. I would just say, if you are friendly with the governor or have contacts, I'm kind of kidding. I think if you're interested in making sure Missouri takes the benefit of this program, I think it's important to let the state energy office, the governor's office, hear that, this is important money for the state. There's no matching requirements for any of this money. I mean, just setting up a program where low-income folks can get a free electric stove, I think is pretty cool. And I'd encourage folks to reach out to your state government. With all of that spiel, I'm going to now stop sharing and pass it to Emily.
All right, thank you, Tony. Just 1 second to pull up my slides. Okay, can you all see that? All right, great. Yeah, thank you, Tony, for all that wonderful information, and thanks, Carolyn, for organizing this event today. Just keeping track of the time, I have fewer slides to present than Tony did, so I think I'll be able to wrap up in time for us to have questions and discussion if there is any today. But yeah, I'm Emily Piontek. I'm the new Managing Director and Policy Coordinator for Renew Missouri. I just started in this role a little over 2 months ago, I guess, after doing grassroots organizing for clean energy in Virginia for the past 4 years, though I'm from Missouri originally, so happy to be back. If you're not familiar with Renew Missouri, we are a nonprofit advocacy organization that does statewide work on energy efficiency and renewable energy. We have offices in Columbia, Kansas City, and St. Louis, and I'm based here in Columbia. So I have organized my presentation on 6 grant programs into these categories. So I'll talk a little bit about 2 programs that would address clean transportation, programs to address energy burden and housing, energy efficient housing, and then ways that we can work on modernizing our electric grid. And so I just wanted to point out before I get started that these 6 programs span departments and agencies, and I know we have folks on from a variety of sectors in Columbia and Boone and Jefferson County. So yeah, just throwing that out there. So that maybe if you're not working at the utility level, if you're in housing or something, we have relevant programs for you too. So I'll start. Oops. Is this not going? Okay, yeah, start with transportation. So I wanted to talk about the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program, or CFI grant program, especially as I know that the City of Columbia does have a plan to clean up the transportation sector in the Climate Action Plan. So this is a new program that's being administered by the Department of Transportation over the next 5 years. So from 2022 to 2026, the CFI program provides $1.5 billion $2.5 billion to deploy public EV chargers and also to just improve clean transportation networks by 2030. I recently took my first road trip by EV, which was challenging to find chargers. So this is definitely a critical and important program. Eligible entities include state and local governments, planning bodies, and transport providers. I know that some of y'all are represented on this call today. And there's 2 program pathways. There's one that focuses specifically on the corridor component. So making sure that we have plenty of EV charging, et cetera, along designated critical pathways. But then I wanted to talk more specifically about the community charging pathway, because I think that'll be more relevant at the local level. And so this is explicitly to help install and fill gaps in EV charging in publicly accessible areas. So, making sure that you have EV chargers in downtowns and local neighborhoods and places where people are just kind of out and about on a regular basis. So the program requirements for the community charging pathway are that the plan must reduce greenhouse gas emissions and fill gaps in charging infrastructure or expand it beyond what might already exist. Awards will range from $500,000 up to $15 million, although there is a cost share component. So the applicant must cover at least 20% of the program cost for the project cost, and then the federal government will cover up to 80% of the rest. So I also wanted to flag that this opportunity isn't currently opened. The first round of funding went out this year, but it'll open again in early 2024. So just keep that on your radar. It's coming. And again, this will run through 2026. So the second clean transportation program that I wanted to talk about are the clean school bus rebates. This is administered by the EPA. It was also newly established as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law. So this is a program to help school districts replace existing school buses with either clean or zero emission vehicles. So a school district can request rebates for up to 15 school buses. The EPA will provide a rebate of $20,000 for those buses. However, you can request additional funding to make those school buses ADA compliant, outfitting them to handle wheelchairs, et cetera. And then during the funding cycle that's currently open, there's $500 million that's available. So that's potentially, I did the math recently, like 25,000 buses, if the money is only going to buses and not those ADA compliant additions. I also wanted to point out, though, that especially in areas where there isn't robust charging infrastructure, or the school district doesn't have the capability of charging buses on site, applicants can also request funding for what are called behind the meter charging infrastructure upgrades. So I've listed some of those here on this slide, but I wanted to make sure that y'all, focused in on the fact that you can also request funding for charging stations themselves, as well as on-site renewable energy facilities to power those charging stations, which is a unique application for the program. And again, this is just if you're trying to use a rebate for the zero emission school buses. So public school districts are eligible, but also, and I know this is the case for Columbia, if a school district contracts with a private company for school buses, and it could be selling, leasing, or operating the buses, they can work together to submit an application to EPA for the rebate program. So this program is currently open, and it closes at the end of January in 2024. Okay, switching to housing, I wanted to talk about the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program as it's administered by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And I know we have some HUD housing here in Columbia. So this program provides loans and grants to either fully retrofit a multifamily, HUD building with clean energy technologies and energy efficiency measures, or it can be used to kind of address item by item issues with energy efficiency and sustainability and just overall clean energy aspects of the building. So there's a couple different tracks for this program, which I'll run through on the next slides, but I wanted to note that the program does include some limited protections for renters. So, if an applicant or if an awardee receives funding from HUD for this program, they have to engage with residents throughout the planning and implementation portions of the project. Some of the projects may require applicant or residents to be relocated during the upgrade or retrofit. And so the HUD is requiring property owners to be in close communication with renters during that process. And then they also have to commit to extend the property's affordability by at least 5 years and then potentially up to 25 years to ensure that the funding isn't being used to make a building new and fancy and better, and then kicking the low-income residents out. So eligibility is open only to property owners who receive HUD rental assistance. And this can be, a private firm or a state government or a local government agency. This application is opening now, but it's closing near the end of this month. That will open again in 2024. So the 3 program pathways are kind of divided by how big the awards are and then what the specific program upgrades are going to be. So the elements pathway and the leading edge pathway are to make some modest improvements to the properties, and those are the smaller awards. And then the comprehensive award, those are your really big awards where you can request up to $20 million per property or $80,000 per unit. Next, I wanted to talk about the Local Energy Action Program, or LEAP. This was launched in 2021, so it's a little bit older, still fairly new, and it's being administered by the U.S. Department of Energy. And so the LEAP program's purpose is to support disadvantaged communities and energy communities. And we heard Tony talk a little bit about what it means to be an energy community earlier, but to assist them with a transition from fossil fuels. And so for this round of funding, there's $18 million that's available. It's expected that between 24 and 32 community projects will be funded with this amount of money. And I was looking at a map, which I'll show you all here in a little bit, but there is a Columbia census tract in Ward 1 that would be considered a disadvantaged community or energy community under the program definition for LEAP. And so, the previous LEAP cohort projects ranged from doing building electrification in a community to building energy storage, resiliency hubs, or microgrid type projects. And so, all of that is aimed at just reducing energy burdens, improving local air quality, and just generally improving the sustainability in those disadvantaged communities. And so for the LEAP program, community-based organizations can partner on an application with each other, and they can also partner with local governments to help local governments achieve some of the program goals. This application period is currently open, and it closes in a little more than a month in December. So here's a map of where previous LEAP projects were funded. And as you can see, there's nothing yet in Missouri. So I think, there is a lot of need in Missouri, and so maybe that positions our state well to become a LEAP community. And then here's a map of where the LEAP eligible Missouri communities are. And you can't really, this is just a screenshot I took from a map that DOE provided, but I promise if you zoom into Columbia, you'd be able to find that one census tract that I referenced that would be eligible for LEAP funding. And I'll share links to all of these programs when they go out with the slides after the webinar. Okay, so switching gears to transmission, I just want to talk quickly about 2 programs. So the first one is the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnerships Program. This is a new program that's being administered by a new office within the U.S. Department of Energy, the Grid Deployment Office. So this opportunity is for $5 billion through 2026 to do, innovative, comprehensive upgrades to our transmission system. So this could be interregional transmission projects, so between states, between power markets. It could also help with accelerating interconnection for clean energy projects. As I think many of us know, there's a huge backlog with the interconnection process. And so these funds can be used to help address some of that. But I think most pertinent to some of the entities who are on the call today, funding can also be used to develop assets on at a smaller scale. So this could be incorporating virtual power plants into municipal operations, deploying DERs like smaller community solar projects or battery storage projects, microgrids, things like that. And then also EVs as they have, battery storage benefits for the grid as well. So this is a bit of a complex program. And I think Missouri did just receive some money to implement this transmission upgrades, and that I think it was like $464 million to undertake a pretty big interregional transmission project. But like I said, there are some of these smaller scale opportunities that are available. And I'm bringing it up here because I know that the city of Columbia, for example, is a customer of the Missouri Public Utility Association, and coordinating with MAPUA on a program like this could be an approach that you all could take to try to seek some of this funding from the Grid Deployment Office. It's not currently, the second round of funding isn't currently available, but it should open very soon. We're expecting it, I guess, either in the next couple of months, this winter or in early 2024. And then finally, I wanted to talk about the Smart Grid Grant. This is an older program. It's also being administered by the U.S. Department of Energy through their Grid Deployment Office. And again, this program, I think, is more geared to some of those smaller scale updates that will improve capacity along the transmission system and also help facilitate the integration of more renewable energy resources at the distribution level. And so, I think the kinds of things that really stand out to me about what Smart Grid Grant funding could be used for are facilitating integration of electric vehicles, and then you're building and grid edge devices like smart meters or other ways to do some of that demand side management for energy efficiency through virtual power plants. And this is something that nonprofit entities and local governments can also apply for, and these funds will be available through 2026. Again, not currently open, but we expect the second round of funding to open very soon, likely in the first couple months of 2024. So looking at the time, I think I did it. I'll stop there, and hopefully we have time for questions. Thanks, y'all. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Yes, we do have 10 minutes left that we can just have a general discussion and questions. So there's and you can unmute yourself or raise your hand or type a question in the chat if you would prefer, if you have a question or a comment.
Carolyn, can I just add one while people are thinking of their questions? Emily's presentation made me think of one thing I wanted to mention, which is, so Emily mentioned that some of those programs are geared at innovative solutions to problems like that transmission program, but I wanted to make sure that the US DOE Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Program, the loan program I talked about, is not meant to fund innovative. You do not have to have an innovative project. You just simply have to have fossil fuel infrastructure or energy infrastructure that you want to repurpose to a clean energy use or replace with clean energy. US DOE has some other loan programs, which I didn't mention today, that are designed to provide financial support for more innovative solutions to problems. But that was not, I wanted to make sure that that distinction was pointed out. Anyways.
Okay, and I also wanted to ask if anybody is on the session today that you didn't get an email directly from me. I may not have your email address to send you the slides afterwards. So if you could type your email address into the chat, if you're willing, then I will make sure you get the slides afterwards. Everybody that got an invitation from me, I should have your address. All right, does anybody have any questions or comments? I'm hoping that smart grid one might be something we could leverage in Columbia, since we're about to embark on a major smart grid transformation here.
Well, Dick's got his hand up, Carolyn, but I did have a question about that, following up on your comment.
Okay, go ahead, Nick.
Well, I was making way for Dick, and
Oh, okay, okay.
he had his
Dick
hand up for
Parker?
a while. Dick, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to watch that, but it's hard to watch.
Yeah.
Dick, go ahead with your question or comment.
Dick, you're on mute. Dick, you're still on mute.
The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act is based on low income. Is the low income based on the resident or the owner? That's important in terms of rental property.
Tony, you're on mute.
I was also talking on mute. I mean, we can't have a Zoom meeting without somebody talking on mute, can we? Or a dog or a cat or something. But I didn't bring a dog or cat with me, so we have to talk on mute. Anyway, So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, as I mentioned, there's the climate bank aspect of it, and then there's the solar for all aspect of that fund. The solar for all aspect, all of that funding, 100% of the money the state is going to get to do community solar must go to what EPA, well, what the statute and then EPA has defined as low income and disadvantaged communities. And there are 4 different ways to define that. One is geographic. And so if you just go to the screening tool that the White House has set up, the Climate and Environmental Justice Screening Tool, there's a link to it in my presentation, or you can just Google Climate and Environmental Justice Screening Tool. You can see the geographic areas that qualify. And there are large swaths of Missouri that qualify, including in mid-Missouri. And then there are 3 other ways that they qualify, and this is a little bit in the weeds. One of them is a different screening. There's an environmental justice screening tool that EPA set up. And so you can look for a few more areas that qualify. And then there's an income-based threshold. And I forget the numbers exactly, but it's something like folks who have income that's 80% of the mean income in their community is my recollection of where don't quote me on the exact threshold, but it's some sort of income-based determination of low-income folks who don't live in a low-income census tract, but are in fact low income based on, well, income. And so there are a few different ways to determine that. And the best way to find this is to look at the actual EPA guidance and not have me try to remember what it says. But there are several different ways of determining qualification. And I'm sure the Missouri Resource Authority agency that's lead on that is deep in the weeds of, mapping out where those folks are. And then the last thing I'll say, Dick, on that question is, then there's the climate bank aspect of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and they're supposed to spend 40% of their money in those same communities. They can fund projects in other communities, but the banks are supposed to direct a lot of that funding to those same communities. I hope that was helpful. Nick, I think it's your turn.
Well, I saw several things there that piqued my interest, of course, and I really appreciate the presentation. I assume city staff that are on here too may have had something to pique their interest as well. But one of the questions I have in terms of the funding is, and Carolyn mentioned the smart grid, we do have plans in the works for that. She also made a note about improving energy efficiency for rental units. And that's something we don't have in place yet, but that we have an interest in. So I'm wondering, for a lot of this funding, do they fund new projects, or will they fund possibly projects that are already in the works? Or both?
That's a good question. And I think it depends on the specific program opportunity. Sometimes they want to just be funding something totally new and you can't access the funding if construction or the project has already commenced. And for others, I believe that's not the case. But Tony, do you have a different take?
I agree with you. It's going to depend on the project. So yeah, so the one area that, say, the city of Columbia could get funding would be to get that initiative or measure in the state's climate action plan, and then seek it as an implementation grant from EPA as one source of funding. My guess is there's going to be several different sources of funding that could be pulled together. But under that EPA program, there's no requirement. Under the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program, CPRG, there's no requirement that it has to be a new project, but you do have to show that the projects would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so I think there must be some showing that the status quo has such level of emissions. And by doing this updated efficiency standard, for example, we would expect over time there would be lower emissions. And so I agree with Emily, it's going to be very case specific, but I don't know of too many projects or too many of these grant programs that have that a on and off switch like that, where it has to be an entirely new thing that you're working on. I don't think that requirement is in these programs, but as Emily said, it's always going to be program specific.
Tony, I just want to respond directly to that. This is Eric Hempel, Office of Sustainability, City of Columbia. And specifically for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, DNR is looking for projects that existing projects or programs that could be expanded in capacity with grant funding from this. So I know that specifically for this, DNR has said that it can be an existing program or a new program. And in this first round of funding, they are looking for projects that might be closer to implementation if they're not already existing. And that's just for the CPRG. That's
Now, Eric, you want to plug your public meetings and your virtual meeting?
yeah, for those of you that may not have seen it in the chat, there is a and for those of you that just have to get another virtual meeting in today, there is a climate pollution reduction grant informational session, and there the link is in the chat there. It's open to anyone, and is maybe more specifically for organizations that are working in this space. So that's a virtual meeting. There are also 2 in-person meetings. That's one is tomorrow at the ARC from 5:30 to 7. And then the next is next Thursday from 5:30 to 7. Will there be more information about what kind of information DNR is looking for? To summarize the point of these meetings, they are to collect project and priority ideas for inclusion in the state's climate priority climate action plan. Happy to provide more information. If somebody wants to email me directly, I'll put my email in the chat.
Eric, I'm really happy to hear that you're deep into the weeds of implementing that program or seeking that funding. One idea that I have had, so I think it's unlikely that the Missouri state government is going to come forward with robust implementation grant applications for this program just because of the political situation. Although I hope I'm wrong, and maybe that is wrong. I think, the city of Columbus is relatively small compared to the population of the United States. But if you worked together with other cities that are outside the Kansas City and St. Louis metro area somehow to do an application that, like, if there were other cities that were similarly situated that wanted to do the same type of upgrade to their standards for rental housing, for example, it would cause the application to show more greenhouse gas reductions, is what I'm trying to say. And so you would be more likely to win. Although I just think the Biden administration wants to direct as much funding to states like Missouri as possible. So I would think you'll have a good chance anyway, but just one thought. Anyway, Peter.
Yeah, Tony, you're looking at this from a high level. You can encourage us if you could give us some information about what's the likelihood of success if we go through this whole process and everything is turned down because there's thousands of applicants. But if you say, look, my estimation is 1 and 2 projects are going to get funded, that gives us hope that all this hard work is worth it. Do you have any kind of picture? Nobody's applying, or it's super hyper competitive, you got to come up with the very best energy savings. If you can give us some clue what we have to do to be successful, I think that would encourage people to participate.
I cannot do that, unfortunately. What I can say is, some of these programs, this is a dodge of your question, Peter. Some of these programs are available in unlimited amounts. So like the clean energy tax credits, if any city or school or church or university wants to build a solar project and that funding is there, you will for sure, unless the law is repealed, you will for sure, when it's built, you will get a check. It actually won't be a check, it'll be a wire transfer from the US Treasury. So that is guaranteed. Another thing is that I think is pretty guaranteed is that the state of Missouri is going to win a grant for the Solar for All program, and there will be a Solar for All program in Missouri. And I think it's important for folks in Columbia or any other community to be in touch with that agency to make sure that they have robust plans for your community and maybe make them better. But as for the CPRG program, which is near and dear to my heart, it's a new program, and EPA has $4.5 billion to spread around the country on implementation grants. And so I expect that they will be quite competitive. But I mean, I also think it's important to, like, you know, take a shot and see if you can get that funding. But that was sort of why I was suggesting to Eric to look for ways to show bigger greenhouse gas reductions by maybe working with Springfield, Missouri. I don't know, just or maybe you guys don't like Springfield, but you like Joplin, and work with Joplin. I don't know, but work with Jefferson City. But I expect they will be. I mean, there are people like you all over the country who care deeply about climate and want to reduce pollution and improve the economies of your your community. And so I would expect there's going to be a decent uptake for that program, but I would still encourage folks to take a hard look. I mean, I work for Sierra Club. I don't work for EPA. I really have no clue what the. Go ahead, Emily. I'm rambling at this point.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, you know, I've listened to a lot of webinars that these different federal agencies have put on about these grant programs, and they always emphasize a desire to distribute these funds equitably throughout the country. And so I think Missouri has a good shot because, you know, maybe we're not one of the states. You know, I showed that map for the LEAP program as an example that's benefited from a certain pot of funding before. So maybe we could be this time. But then the other thing, just when you are drafting up an application, you know, they really want to see greenhouse gas reductions. And Missouri is, I think it's either the 5th or 8th most energy intensive state in the country. So reducing our greenhouse gas emissions is going to have a bigger effect, I think, than if we're, you know, one of the states that already has a lot going in that regard. So that's, you know, just something to think about as you might be writing up an application. I just wanted to throw that out there too.
And I just want to also remind everybody that, you know, parts of Columbia are designated as an energy community and parts of Boone County. And then also, you know, some of the census tracts have been designated as having set-asides, which means, you know, that the money can only go to those kind of communities and possibly slightly increases our chances. So, all right, well, I see that we're 5 minutes past the time that I had scheduled. So I know some people may need to start dropping off. And if you do, you know, that's fine. I just wanted to see before we wrap up if there's any additional questions. And also wanted to let you know that in the chat are Tony's email as well as Emily's email. If you do have follow-ups you want to ask them, if you just want to do any kind of a general follow-up, I've put in the Sierra Club email, which is sc.midmo.group@gmail.com. So we really appreciate everybody joining today, and I will be sending around not only the copy of the slides, but also this recording, assuming all the technology works just fine. So I thank everyone for joining today and look forward to working with everybody more to make some of these programs a reality for Mid-Missouri. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.